All right, guys. We're talking about recovery. And more specifically, we're talking about how to plan recovery times out. We're talking about the importance of recovery overall. So we're going to get into some important stuff. So make sure you are tuned in. And as always, Instagram, we're going to do some Q&A after the show is over. So make sure you're sticking around until the end so you can get your questions answered too. So, guys, recovery. This is a massively important topic that a lot of people don't dig into enough. I just saw one comment come in, tips on cutting weight. My tip for you on cutting weight is go follow Coach TJW. He is the weight cutting specialist I send all my athletes to. I can do super basic, like help you lose some weight. He is a miracle worker. When it comes to cutting weight, follow Coach TJW. Stop asking me, ask him instead. He'll be able to give you way more in-depth answers. And I've always been a big believer in staying in my lane. So Coach TJW for the weight cutting. All right, guys, we're getting into it. We're talking about recovery, and we're going to go in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast, the #1 show for athletes looking to gain an edge on their opponents and build their dream careers in sport. I'm your host, Kenny Dussault, and today we are talking about recovery. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because a lot of athletes struggle with recovery. And they struggle, when I say they struggle with recovery, I mean in a few different ways. Number one, they struggle taking recovery days overall because they feel like if they're not training hard on a day, that means that they're falling behind. They feel like, they need to be training while their opponents, like they can't have their opponents training while they're resting. And it's all the kind of rah motivational bullshit that you hear from God knows who. But the big thing you've got to understand, guys, is recovery is part of the journey. So to lead off, I'm going to use the analogy that I use talking to my athletes about recovery, which is think about training as if you're on a road trip. And when I say that, what I mean is what most people think is that if you're on a road trip, you need to, like, the more you drive, the further along you're going to get, which on the surface makes sense. If you keep driving, you're going to get further. If you stop, you're not going to get as far. But recovery days, that is like stopping for gas on the road trip. So the mentality that a lot of athletes take is that stopping for gas is going to take away from the trip. All that time that you're spent at the gas station, filling up the car, etc., changing the oil, whatever else, you're not moving forward, therefore you're not improving. And for that time, yeah, you're taking away from moving forward in the trip. You're not actually physically going further down the road. But what happens if you don't stop for gas? The car runs out of gas. And when the car runs out of gas, it's usually not conveniently placed right by a gas station where you can just fill up and get back on the road. It's usually out in the middle of some random highway somewhere. So now you're going to take way longer away from the trip because you didn't stop for gas when you actually still had some left. Now, the thing with that analogy is basically that is like injuries, right? Injuries, pain, struggle, anything like that actually takes you out of training. If you're injured and you can't train, now you're forced to stop. That's the car running out of gas in the middle of the highway. Now, instead of conveniently stopping in for gas, refilling and hopping back on the road, you're stuck in the middle of a highway and you have to walk miles and miles and miles to the closest gas station to fill up a little jerry can and walk all the way back to your car. And you're way further behind than if you would just stop for gas in the first place. And so first off, why do you need a recovery day in your week? So the first thing we're going to talk about is just the actual purpose of recovery, which hopefully should be pretty straightforward. But I know there are a lot of you listening to this even right now that don't take a recovery day in your week. I feel fine. I don't feel like I need it. It's okay. I'll just keep training. Like when I'm tired, I'll take one. But guys, you need to have a recovery day in your week. Build the habit now for this one reason and this one reason only. If you continue to drive the car without stopping for gas, the car runs out of gas, you get injured. Simply by allowing yourself to take some time to recover every single week, let's say all week long you're using your energy, you come to your recovery day, that's your chance to recharge the battery. And if you never recharge the battery burns out. The battery burns out, that causes problems. So instead of taking the egotistical approach of I can grind through anything, blah, 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 like I hear a lot of people talk, take the smart approach and think about longevity in your career. Now, what about that mentality that I hear a lot of athletes mention, which, well, I can't rest while my opponent's training. I need to outwork everyone in the room and all that kind of crap. The big thing you've got to understand, guys, is just being in the gym is not necessarily making you better. The more hours you put in does not necessarily create a better result. Is it helpful? Of course. I'm never going to sit here and say you don't need to train hard to be successful. I'm never going to sit here and say training hard isn't important. But for some reason, whenever I talk about this stuff, I always have people comment things like that. So I want to make sure I'm coming out ahead of it. Training hard is very important. Pushing yourself is very important. Spending a lot of hours in the gym pushing yourself is very important. But just because you were there, it doesn't mean it was productive. Like when it comes to the strength and conditioning work I do with my athletes, one of the most common things I have my athletes say when they start working with me is that training isn't as hard as they expected. Because the reason, guys, is the goal of training is not to murder you. The goal of training is not to burn you out. The goal of training is to build you into a better version of yourself coming into your next competition. The goal of training is to build you into a better version of yourself coming into the next competition. So what I mean when I say that is if all we're doing is just burning you out, doing more reps, more sets, more work, more time on the bike, more time on the road, more time doing whatever, and we're not actually focused around the result we want to get out of it, you're not going to be successful. Because even if you put in the most hours, if your body's beat up, if you're sore, injured, tired, and you can't get quality training in because of the level of burnout you're feeling, you're not getting better just because you're in the gym more. Does that make sense? So that's one of the biggest mentalities that I really want to help athletes shift away from. And again, I'm going to say it again because I know that every time I say this, I get pushback on it. This is not me saying that hard work is not important. This is not me saying that training is not like that. A lot of training is a bad thing. What I'm saying is that you need to pay attention to your body, because putting in the most hours doesn't matter if you're not able to get to the competition at the best possible level that you can be at. If you've burnt yourself out and everything hurts and everything's sore and you can't move well and you can't throw a punch because your shoulders are so tight and in pain, it doesn't matter how many hours you put in, you're still probably losing that fight. So you need to shift away from the mentality that the most work creates the best results and think about the quality of the work you're doing. So when it comes to recovery, have that one day in your week no matter what, because that's going to allow you to recharge the batteries. And the more you recharge the batteries, the better that next week of training is going to be. Because yes, on week 1, you can train through your recovery day without much repercussion. Week 2, you can probably still train through your recovery day and feel okay. By the time we're getting into 3 weeks in a row, 4 weeks in a row, 5 weeks in a row, yeah, you might be there. You might still be training. You might still feel good that you checked the box and you showed up to the gym today, but you're not getting quality work in at this point. You're just showing up to say that you showed up. If you're listening to this and you've trained the last 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks in a row and haven't taken quality actual recovery time over the course of those weeks, think back to your last session, the last one that you did, regardless of what it was. Name me 3 things that you actually improved during that time. I'm not saying, oh, I worked hard, I pushed, and it was good. Name me 3 skills that you worked on that you actually made a significant improvement on in that session. A lot of you won't be able to. You'll be able to name, what you did in that session, but I'm talking real, actual quality improvement. Real change where you were like, oh, I was doing it like this, and now I made this change, and that's going to help me because of A, B, C, and D. You probably can. Maybe 1 or 2 of you can, but for the large majority, you're probably thinking about this and you're going, oh man, yeah, I know I was training. I know I was working on, any one of these skills, but like, what kind of changes did I actually make? It probably turns into a blur after a while. And the reason is because you're showing up, you're checking the box, but the quality isn't there because you're fried. Your body is beat up. Your body needs a day off. Now, we're going to get into the next part of the podcast here, which is talking about planning extra recovery days. And I know as soon as I say that, I've got a lot of people that are shuddering at the thought of taking an extra day off, because a lot of you don't even take the one day off. But this is where this is going to come into play for you. So one of my athletes, before not his last fight, but the fight before that, about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks out, sent me a text and said, hey, I'm supposed to do my strength and conditioning session, and I'm supposed to be doing a 2-hour wrestling practice today. But my body is beat. My neck is sore. I can't really move my neck left to right. My back kind of hurts. Like my body's just beat. Should I just push through it, or should I take today off? And immediately, without thinking, I told him, take today off, come back tomorrow and see how you feel. And right away, he was like, but, I don't feel like I should take a day off this close to the fight. Like I'm 2 weeks out, and I don't want to take extra rest time. Like I need to make sure that I'm training. I need to make sure that I'm ready. And so I explained to him, was like, okay, let's say you go in today and you do that 2-hour wrestling session. Your body's beat up, your neck hurts, your back hurts, your shoulders hurt, your knees hurt. And you go in and you do that 2-hour wrestling session. How good is that session going to be with the way you're feeling? You're feeling sluggish. You're feeling beat up. Nothing feels good. How good is that session going to be? It's like, yeah, probably not very good. It's like, okay. And if you go in and you have a not so good session, how are you going to feel tonight? It's like, yeah, probably not very good. Like if I'm not, feeling good, doing well 2 weeks out from the fight, probably not going to feel very good. Okay, and if you keep doing that every day until the fight, how do you feel like that's going to affect you? Shit, yeah, like if I'm not really getting quality training in, that's probably not going to feel very good. And if I don't let my body actually heal up, probably not going to feel very good either. So I told him, I was like, take today off, because man, at this point, you know how to fight. There's not one thing in this particular wrestling session that you're going to do that's going to be the difference maker of you winning or losing this fight. There's not one thing, there's not one specific session, one specific moment that is going to be that massive difference maker. So instead of, I have to push through because it's on the schedule, listen to your body. Your body is telling you you need a day off. So he took the day off. The next day I texted him and said, hey man, how you feeling? He texted back, holy shit, I feel better than I felt in years. And the reason is because his body was telling him, hey, you need a day off. And instead of the typical hard-headed mentality, no, I gotta wrestle, I gotta push through it, I gotta fucking grind, he took the fucking day off. And by taking the extra day off, he was able to recharge the batteries. He was able to put himself in a better situation. And the next 3 days, he had some of the best training sessions of his life before getting into the recovery week, peak week for the fight. And he ended up knocking the dude out in about 7 minutes. And the guy who he fought was a high-level, up-and-coming, undefeated prospect. And now he was able to not just take him out, but take him out in dominant fashion. But the reason was because he listened to his body. And that's what so many of you guys are afraid to do. So when it comes to extra recovery days, what I want to stress with you is learn to listen to your body. So the first thing that's going to come up that is going to reinforce with me that you need an extra recovery day is plain and simple. You're at that point where you do not want to train. And I understand we all wake up sometimes and we don't want to train. But if you wake up, if you're a high level serious athlete and you wake up 2-3 days in a row not wanting to train, you need a day off. Because you not wanting to train today isn't you being lazy. It's not you being soft. It's not you being a pussy. It's your body being like, dude, you're overworked. Fucking go home. And so that's number one. When you wake up 2 or 3 days in a row and you don't want to train, that is your body telling you you need a day off. Number two, if you are feeling like you are progressively getting worse while you train, if you're feeling like you're going through every training session and you're sparring with a guy or a girl who's at a lower level than you and you just can't win any of the exchanges, you're not getting worse. Your body is functioning at a lower percentage, which is allowing this other person to start getting the better of you. When you're drilling and you feel like you need your coach to explain something 3, 4, 5, 6 times before you're actually getting the hang of the drill, you're not stupid. Your body and your mind are burnt out. So when you start to really feel like you're starting to get worse while you train, that's your body telling you you need to take a day off. You need to charge the batteries. And when you charge the batteries, you're going to feel better. And when you feel better, that bad shit is going to stop happening. And then finally, when you have those little nagging injuries, and I know we all have them from time to time, but when you have those little nagging injuries that now just won't go away, you know, if you have a hard training session and you feel it in your shoulders a little bit, that's normal. But if you start to realize that, you know, you're feeling it in your shoulders and you wake up the next day and you're still feeling it in your shoulders, and another day later and you're still feeling it in your shoulders, and another day later, and it's just never getting better, that's because you're not letting it get better. You're not taking the recovery that you need to allow your body to heal. So instead of just continuing to grind because you're so fucking tough, listen to your body, take the extra day, let your batteries recharge, and come back to it feeling better than you were feeling before. So guys, that is recovery. That is when you should plan extra recovery days. That is why recovery is such an important part of your training. And as always, I appreciate you all tuning in. I appreciate you all being here. That is the show for today. So I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will catch you on the next episode. Guys, we're going to stick around for a couple of minutes and do a little bit of Q&A. So if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below.